Hello, ladies and gents, boys and girls, people of all ages, sexualities, and identities, and welcome back to another series review. And today's series review is none other than Stranger Things. Sit back, grab yourself some popcorn, maybe grab yourself a burger if you feel like it, because we're in for hell of a ride. Our story starts in the town of Hawkins. And it turns out that a mysterious experiment that has been going on behind the scenes has caused a lot of anomalies to begin. A young girl has been discovered in the woods, and a child named Will has gone missing. His three friends, Dustin, Lucas, and Mike, are all out looking for him. But what they find instead, well, is a young girl they call Elle. Elle is then adopted by Hopper, who is the local town sheriff. Meanwhile, Will's mum is going absolutely crazy with Christmas lights. And the rest of Hawkins is finally waking up to the idea that their world has been turned upside down. The three lads try to use Elle to essentially find Will and instead find themselves face to face with a Demogorgon. Now, what is a Demogorgon for anyone who, by some miracle, has been living under a rock and not watched the show? Essentially, a Demogorgon is a creature that looks like a plant tulip, but with lots and lots of teeth on it, and razor-sharp claws. Our whole story started off with Will, Lucas, and Dustin all playing a game of D&D. But their life was flipped upside down when Will tries to go home one night and never is to be seen again. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Nancy and her boyfriend are trying to figure out what their relationship is like and whether it's worth continuing. Alongside this, it also turns out that the military are looking for Elle, and Hopper and the boys must do their best to keep Elle under control so that the military never find her. During this season, we find out why it's so traumatic for Hopper to be really close to Elle. This is all because his daughter had died of cancer and also that he had lost his wife. We also learn that the Demogorgons are attacking specific targets. But we'll get into that further down the line. By season 2, we soon learn that there is a creature out there known as the Mind Flare. This creature resembles a giant, I want to say personally myself, I look at it and think of a cross between an exomorph, a spider, and a kind of scorpion. But essentially, the Mind Flare is coming for Hawkins, and the team must do what they can. Oh, quick mention, Will is back. Will has been found! He's alive! We're then introduced to Steve Harrington, who's kind of the stud of the town, alongside a bunch of other characters who we will go on to learn much more about as the series progresses. We also get a really big glimpse into Elle's past and get to see more of the experiment which led to her getting her powers. We also learn the fact that she looked into the upside down but didn't know what it was, and it scared her. By series 3, we learn that Elle and Mike are having a rocky relationship. We're introduced to Max, who is an absolute badass. We're also introduced to Max's brother, who's a little bit of a dickhead. Just gonna say it. And we're also introduced to Erica and so many more characters who will become relevant as we get towards the final seasons. But for now, we end up in a bit of a complicated plot where essentially the team has to decipher a bunch of stuff from the Russians. They also have to decipher why the Russians have a Demogorgon, and Robin and Steve just kind of get high on truth serum. They have a whole messed up conversation about the film Back to the Future, which, frankly, I don't really want to get into because they're completely right. Erica kicks a bunch of people's asses. Elle then has to pull a bit of a Demogorgon out of her leg, which looks excruciating. They fight a giant monster, which I'm guessing is remnants of the Mind Flare or some other creature. I'm not quite sure, please correct me in the comment sections. And essentially, they all save the day at a cost. Series 4 comes along. Hopper was thought to be dead, but he's alive, but in Russia, captured by Russian soldiers. We're introduced to Eddie. We're also introduced to Vecna, the big bad boss, who is going to be the bad guy and absolutely wreck a bunch of people by the end of the season. We slowly but surely start to get a rough idea of who Vecna is and why he's so important. Turns out he was the very first experiment, and he used to work alongside Elle. Elle goes off, lots of people go on a road trip, and essentially Eddie is running away because people think he killed a young girl named Chrissy. Eddie sacrifices himself in the Upside Down and decides to be a hero, never gets his chance to basically put his finger up at his principal, and pretty much the whole series revolves around this idea of redemption. Vecna at the end of the season then tries to kill Max, but Max is then saved by Kate Bush, because Kate Bush is an absolute legend. Vecna decides by Series 5 that he's going to go full Freddy Krueger on everyone. Slash Dark Crystal, slash, let's just say, The Shining, slash every other major sci-fi and horror. He just pulls out all the cards. The team decide that the only way to get to Vecna is to go into the Upside Down, only to discover that Vecna's not in the Upside Down. He's in a parallel universe-ish parallel planet. They decide to cross the bridge, find Vecna in his dimension in his giant gothic-looking castle, and decide to defeat him once and for all. However, this plan comes in stages. First, they must save all the children, Holly included, who Vecna has kidnapped. Then they must defeat an army of soldiers who are essentially after Eleven and her sister. They must also wake Max up from her coma that she's been in since last season. And Will must learn to become the sorcerer he was always meant to be. So overall, sounds like a simple plan, yeah? No, this gets worse, because as soon as they decide to cross into this other barrier, the world almost comes crushing down and destroys the whole tower they're all standing on. To make it worse, Holly almost escapes Vecna very early on in the series, but sadly, due to all the layers of where Holly is trapped, turns out that essentially she's been in his castle the whole time, not in her bedroom where she believed herself to be. Max escapes and essentially wakes up from her coma. Robin decides to do a radio show called Rockin' Robin. Joyce and Hopper finally get together. And 11 sacrifices herself to essentially close the gate once and for all. Or does she? Steve almost dies falling off of a tower. And Dustin decides to keep on the legacy of Eddie. Will comes out as gay. And Mike's mum decides to kill a bunch of demo dogs using a washing machine. Mike then contemplates over his future without Elle, and the rest of the team essentially graduate. Well, they graduate with a twist because Dustin puts his middle finger up to the principal. Holly and her friends essentially become the next D&D group. Derek stops being an asshole, and he goes from being dipshit Derek to delightful Derek. Vecna gets his head chopped off by Will's mum, and everyone else lives out their life trauma. Now, before I summarize and finish this Stranger Things review, I think it's only right that we go through the history of Henry I Vecna, or Mr. Whatsit as he's called in Series 5. Henry's life was originally very ordinary, well, as ordinary as it could be. But as we soon discover by Series 5, it turns out that when Henry was a young boy, his most traumatic incident was when he went down to a cave. Whilst down in this cave, he found a shot and injured man who seemed to be carrying a silver briefcase. In this briefcase was a rock that seems to be from another world. Henry gets shot in the hand and then gets healed by this rock. This is after Henry bashes the guy's skull in, and the reason he does this is because the man showed him no sympathy when all he was trying to do is help. The man was paranoid and believed that Henry had been sent by some secret organization of the government, when in fact Henry was just a lost little boy looking to find out what's going on down in the cavern. After escaping this down the line, Henry goes home and finds himself with telekinetic powers that he can't explain. These powers would make it hard for him to live in one town or another from time to time. His parents moved him to Hawkins in hopes of a new and fresh start. Whilst in Hawkins, Henry becomes really versed in everyone at school. But when people start pushing Henry's buttons, the dark shadow inside of him begins to wake up. And eventually Henry must be taken off to a special facility in Hawkins to test his powers and find out the lengths of his abilities. Conveniently at the same time as this, there was a shipwreck in the South Pacific where a boat went missing. No one quite knows where to or why it went missing, but it seems to have some connection to a world that would eventually be known as the Upside Down. Henry gets labelled 1 by the people in the facility. He is tested to his abilities and finds himself out of control, blowing up a lot of the materials and escaping in hopes of going back to his school for the school play. Once he arrives at the school play trying to reconnect with the girl he had fallen in love with, Henry finds himself at odds with his powers and accidentally kills her, making her fall off of the canapé and onto the stage. Meanwhile, elsewhere, young Joyce and Hopper, are trying to understand Henry, but because of Henry's extent of his powers and unable to control it, Joyce can't get through to him. Eventually, Henry goes back to the facility and starts to help a lot of the young children with the similar powers to him to essentially rebuild and start the experiment again. However, little does Henry know to what he doesn't know and what we find out in Series 5, but all of the children have used his blood, and this is why they all have the same powers as him. Henry must have found this out though at some point because he decides to go round massacring all the children, except for 11. He tries to offer 11 a new start, but 11 decides to turn against him after she has seen the massacre that has ensued. She manages to push Henry through a portal into the Upside Down, trapping him there forever. Well, at least that's what she thought. Henry eventually escapes the Upside Down and returns to Hawkins, hunting down the people who wronged him, and for a start, he attacks his own father. His father then sits in a cell with no eyes for endless amounts of days, but every time his son's name is mentioned, he begins to be driven crazy. Henry then eventually comes up with a plot after being burned to death in the Upside Down, and his plot is to basically go to this other world and use the children as a kind of pushing tool to push the two worlds together and destroy everything. Essentially, he wants to restart the world, But first, he must break the mind of the children as he sees them to be so weak. They describe Henry as a dark force, or at least the monster that Henry keeps going on about as the Dark Thing. Now, the Dark Thing is drawn from a book that Holly has been reading. Henry introduces himself to Holly in the beginning as Mr. Whatsit. He also does this to all the other children and essentially becomes their imaginary friend, convincing them that taking them to this other world is a way to save them from the monsters. One of the people he points out to be a monster is Max, and he knows that if Max gets too close to Holly, that essentially all his plans will be ruined. 11 eventually breaks into his world and manages to thwart his plan, allowing the children to escape long enough that they may go back home. Henry is angered by this and of course struggles to go after the children due to the cave they go through being part of a traumatic memory. However, eventually he breaks through and goes down to the cave, seeing his own trauma face to face once again. Will breaks into Henry's mind and essentially sees all of the trauma and says to Henry that he doesn't blame him for the way he is, as he had no choice, but Henry points out that he embraces being Vecna and finds this a good thing. He likes to have the power, as he believes that the human race has had its time and they're worthless. Henry also points out earlier in the story that apparently he had taken Will as his first victim on purpose to test how far he could push him. On top of that, he also made Will make all the tunnels under Hawkins in his sleep. So, Stranger Things overall as a series, what were my thoughts? It had its ups, it had its downs, and most importantly, I feel like it definitely had some parts of it that dragged. The Duffer brothers are absolutely incredible storytellers. I like that they have kind of done this juxtaposition between the beginning and the end with the D&D. However, I do feel like there are some music tracks that are a little bit questionable. One I've got to point out in the final recently is Purple Rain. It's a great love song, but I feel like it's not as powerful as Kate Bush. And I feel like no matter what song they'd put in that scene, there was always going to be that problem. However, I would like to just state for the record that I loved the play, I love the series, and I absolutely love the direction that this story has gone in. From the beginning, and all the mystery and all the experiments and all the in-depth details to this franchise as a whole, I definitely feel like the Duffer brothers had a clear outline of where they were going, what they were doing with their characters, and why they were doing it. I feel like as we've gone along, we've got to learn all about the scientists, the soldiers, the backstory of our main characters and their traumas. And the layers of our villain are just so thick and rich that I feel like that is what's made Vecna or Henry or One or Mr. Whatsit, depending on which name you prefer, so strong of a villain. It just kind of makes me wish, though, in a subtle way, we'd had longer with this villain. I know that it's been hinted that they've been there since the beginning with the Demogorgons and the Demodogs and the Mind Flare, but I really feel like this constant breakup of Series 5 has made it harder because you know you want so much more. I love the callback, though, to the Freddy Krueger reference in one of the scene where Holly's sitting in the room and Mr. Whatsit is in the window, so she doesn't realise that he's been there the whole time. I also like how Mr. Whatsit appears in the library whilst Holly's reading a book. I also love the way that he just kind of appeals to all the kids. However, I feel like one thing that could have been strained upon is the idea of actually getting to know what he had done to get to all of the kids, not just Holly. I mean, we get an idea with Derek that essentially he was picked on and Mr. Whatsit just needed him. But when he starts to become useless to him, he decides to traumatize him with the idea of that he would kill his family. 11, Elle, Jane. Millie Bobby Brown absolutely blows it out the park in this series with her performance. The way we go from a traumatized kid to a strong character who finally lets go of trying to be Hopper's daughter and tries to just do what she needs to do. Mike, Will, Dustin, Lucas. 4 incredible characters with 4 different outlooks on how they're going to handle a situation. Mike sometimes feels like, however, though, that he is just kind of dragging along with the journey. Dustin definitely knows where he's going. Dustin, Eddie, and Steve's relationship between each other, chef's kiss, pure comedic beauty, along with Robin as well. Erica. What can I say? She just badass. Erica having that kind of needle scene was brilliant. I also just love how Erica just badmouths everyone, no matter what they say. Joyce. What did I think of Joyce? Joyce is a very interesting character. I don't feel like I quite get her in season 1 because of the whole lights business, but I feel like as we go along and as we get towards the end, I really get to see her as that strong mother figure. I also kind of feel like the play gave her more than we see on screen. But overall, by the end, I feel like Joyce has that kind of strong will that we need her to have. Hopper is a conflicting character. I mean, he starts off as a bit of the asshole of the sheriff, who, we get it, he's doing his job, but he just kind of mocks everyone's plans, and then eventually ends up going along with it anyway. I do feel like, though, there was that hint that Hopper might die, there was the hint that Steve might die, and you know what, of all the characters who could have died, I wouldn't have been mad. Honestly, just personally. I would not have been mad because I felt like their stories could have ended there and we could have continued. But I can see why they've stayed alive, and I can see what strength it's done to the rest of the characters. So overall, what did I think of the series? As I said, very strong characters, very strong character plot, very strong villain. And overall, I mean, I can't thwart the series too much. However, I do have a big question to the Duffer brothers, and that question is 11 alive or isn't she? Because I kind of feel like that scene you showed me is keeping me scratching my head, and that's a good thing. But I'm just gonna keep asking, is she alive? But other than that question, I mean, overall, the conclusion to Vector, the conclusion to a lot of these story arcs that have been going over time, I feel like was very strong, and for that reason, I give Stranger Things a solid 10 out of 10 all round, all series. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next series review. Until then, goodbye, stay beautiful, and have an incredible night.